Hey, Yiska,
Yo,
does Overwatch Esports need a massive reset?
I mean, there are so many changes coming in. You might as well call it starting from scratch
Yeah,
in many ways. Of course, that doesn't mean necessarily strategically. That doesn't necessarily mean in the way we understand the game, even though that will also be impacted. But everything, like once you lay down the mouse and look at the scene, look at the structures, I think there is a complete overhaul possible and maybe necessary, and maybe in some parts, as we will talk about, will be forced because with new introductions come new challenges, and therefore we have to figure something out, right? Like we might as well toss everything we know about a competitive Overwatch in the trash that happens outside the game, right? Like I think this is so fundamentally different to as to what we have experienced. Like always between 50 and 60% of South Koreans at the top. Um, Now see that, like, let's say, propose a system of 2 players, maximum of 2 players being allowed on import slots at any given time. Fundamental change, right? Once again, completely changes the game, changes how it's played, changes how teams are built. That you once again have such a destabilizing factor that will absolutely contribute to what's a new facelift, or rather, okay, let me actually sell you on this, because
okay. Hit me.
we talked about all these aspects. We talked about hero bans as well, which is another thing that we could explore, right? We talked about map drafts. We talked about broadcasting never 100%ly figuring out how this game wants to be broadcast, new opportunities opening up due to others waning, new cooks in the kitchen and whatnot. This game also needs a marketing reframe.
Yeah.
Badly. We thought Overwatch 2 might be that thing. It never happened to be the case. If anything, like the all the sludge and like the Blizzard internal issues and the lack of updates, and then PvE getting canceled now. That all that mimetic load is still on this game. Now it has a new owner, and it has probably a very different way it will be broadcast to the world, how the esports presents, right? And I think there's also something to be said about Overwatch 2 as a game being underappreciated, especially the advancements that this team has been making, and the refocus on it. And you have Aaron Keller saying, or implying as much as to say, we are focusing on the hardcore experience once again.
Yeah.
Right? It all comes together to a new vision, and someone needs to take care of this marketing language and language in Overwatch at large in order to explain this to people that this is not the experience that was you are used to, right? Maybe you never wanted that polish. Once again, if you're watching this, you're probably a fan of the American franchise sports system. Open your heart to the possibility that not only that this warded off some people from being interested because they didn't want to have that type of experience, but also the flavor that it could bring. And with a facelift, with a reframing of how all these factors come together, the experience that you will have watching competitive Overwatch going forward will be entirely different. And I would say much more similar to the beta stages, where people first fall in love, right? The Ghost to Gamers type of event. I'm not saying it's from a professional level, but from the tone of the scene, from the flavor that it had. And if we can then entice great storytellers to really flesh out the stories that are always bubbling under the surface, but never really, after season 1, all the budget of telling the individual player stories went away. Suddenly the game came in focus. And that's not a way how to broadcast esports. I'm sorry. If you think the game is the most important part about esports, you do not understand it. It has always been about players. And it's been about teams, and it's been about the competition. And for a while, I lost hope or this scene made me believe that it isn't about that. But if you look at everything outside of Overwatch, everyone tells you it is about the competitive excellence, it's about the story of the players, it's about focused content on them. Everyone has something interesting about them. You need different keys to unlock that treasure that's in them that will resonate with someone in the scene. And we somehow just focused on virtual pixels. I think, honestly, the Emerald gun system is not as much as it is a cool feature. It is a clear sign. Because if you remember back what Jeff Kaplan said, they would never do golden guns again.
Yeah.
More than anything else, this is a signal of we're not Jeff Kaplan. We're not building that type of experience. We're looking towards the hardcores a little bit more. And I hope, like, as also rethinking the competitive system.
Yes.
Maybe even PvE is now something that we don't care that much about. We have a cool story, give it to someone else or whatever. I'm not sure if that's happening, but I would hope that that's the case. The team can once again come together, make cool heroes, make cool maps. I think more so than game modes. Please, like, we need more than 2 maps per game mode, right? Fleshing that out, fleshing out what competitive ladders look like, how that feeds into a highly competitive scene, how ranked becomes really important again, right? How to get rid of the toxicity, how to make it fun again, how to make games even, and that all funneling towards the top of the competition. People admiring and really getting an appreciation of the feeling. Now that we're also a free-to-play game, the scale is coming. Like, fundamentally, this is now a different ball game, and we need to rethink how this works. I think, like, in large parts also, that we went free-to-play, that opportunity that it presented to the esport was never really cashed up on.
No.
Right?
No way, yeah. Massively wasted.
Theoretically, there's so many new players interested into this system. They're not necessarily, on Twitch and whatnot. Maybe they're on TikTok, but engage them, funnel them into the system. Tell them who, Lip is. Tell them who someone is, right? The MVPs of the list, of the league. Make being good in Overwatch, like, carry some weight in the actual virtual game, right? Yeah. In the playground. And that force will carry you a long way. I think that's the thing that we see in all the other esports that we follow. Like, solo queue is super important in League of Legends, for instance, and carries a lot of status and weight. And, like, when someone, like, every news site wrote about Chovy reaching 2K rating. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
That's international news, okay, in the esports system. Make that for Overwatch. Make it really prestigious. And it will just go off as an arrow. And then, cooks in the kitchen, figure out, like, all those talking points. Some changes are being forced upon us. I think another big change that is coming is the economic realities forcing a 5-player roster.
Yeah.
Where there's no excuse anymore. If you're a tank, you need to play all tanks. If you're support, you probably need to play all supports. So that will change the flavor of it as well. But it's also cool because that's much more to the gameplay experience.
Yeah.
And that's once again a lesson or a talking point I steal from Jake, the Overwatch League broadcaster, and newly found of K-pop fame. Make the professional game play like a ranked game. The same chaos. And hero bans is one way. Map draft would be another way. Honestly, smaller rosters make it more economically feasible, but also add a bit of chaos. All of that just needs to be repackaged. Throw all the old trash knowledge that you think you have about how this runs from a team side, from a broadcasting side, from a streaming side out and refigure out this thing.
For sure. So do you want to start in terms of, like, I guess we've just had BlizzCon, so unless you were living under a rock, you'll have seen. Overwatch 2 has a brand new game mode. We've got Clash now to work with, which gives us, 6 map modes to work with in a system that generally uses best of 5s.
Yeah.
So that's an immediate change that's going to need to be looked at, right?
Yeah. Like, how are you going to do it, right? Like, there now is the necessity for a map draft in some sense, right? So we talked about hero bans. Now map draft needs to be involved, or I guess alternatively you could cut one map type from the competition at large, right? Like that's also a possibility. Also keep in mind, if we trend towards the more open systems, right, where you have 500 teams or something, it's very unlikely that you're always going to have time for best of 5. It will trend to best of 3s as well, right? So we will need to figure something out. And I would hate if it was not given that agency of deciding which map archetype to play was not to be given to the teams. I would hate if that was dictated top down, and that flavor that you get of like a team having a certain type of map archetype, right? And the strategy of pick banning and whatnot. That gets lost in our system of just like, on rails, just like pick a couple of maps. For some map types, it definitely matters which map you pick. Let's be honest, like in Push, you have 2 maps, both of them, they don't play similarly, but similarly enough. And like if you're good on one type, you're probably also good on the other map. Therefore, the map choice doesn't matter that much. I think the map draft is one of the pinnacle decisions that Blizzard will need to make in order to say, like, do we give the agency to the teams? Do we maybe let tournament organizers determine the systems that they want to see, and maybe we try and error for some time? Or are we going to once again top down make the decisions for the players and take a lot of the flavor out of the system, right?
I think given taking Valorant as an example, something the VCT has done really well is the whole map bans and map picks, where you have that kind of initial strategy of pulling teams off of their favored maps, putting them onto their non-favored maps, and you have that kind of give and take. It'd be a shame to lose that to a kind of, you are playing these maps and that's that.
Yeah, it's also, I think like if you look at the other scenes, like in League of Legends specifically, Worlds, I don't think it's necessarily boring to have these decisions made outside in the public, and like having some expert mauled about the decisions and already like say, oh, lost in draft, right? Like that's content, right? Like to be able, like it's a little slower, right? It sets up, it adds another dimension to the game of Overwatch. It's even a little unsatisfying. I always felt like that was sort of hidden from us in the old system, is someone signs the maps on a sheet of paper and we never get to learn anything about the decisions that were made there, right? We do not see the facial expressions of the actors that are making these decisions in the moment and whatnot, where we would have time to focus on this. Like it's a major problem that we have in broadcasting this game as well, which is another point I think like that needs to be fundamentally rethought on how we do this.
I mean, we've already mentioned in a couple of videos previously how the broadcast, well, some of the weaknesses perhaps that the Overwatch League broadcast had in its approach, not relying so many on player personalities and kind of not taking advantage of some of the strengths of the game. So what are the kind of changes that you think? Obviously, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the tournament structures, which we'll talk about. It depends on what players stick around. But what are the kind of changes that you think would make a big difference to the broadcast?
I know, like, for instance, we reported that ESL was going to be involved, that WDG was going to be involved. I hope they get more creative input in how to broadcast these systems. If we recall back way to Apex, they had a little bit more agency in how they are going about things. Arguably, they weren't given enough agency. This is a little bit of a backstory from my days, like way back in the day before Overwatch League, where observers were, for instance, they were not allowed to switch to like from Genji to Genji or something. Right. Understandably, because it's like a broadcasting decision where it could be confusing, right?
Sure.
But sometimes that's really important, because if Blade is the most important ultimate in that fight, you probably need to be on the other one. I think broadcasting-wise, we had a very interesting approach at some point in the early Overwatch League era, right? Which was the Twitch pass, where you had access to every single player's first-person camera.
Yeah.
And that added a lot of flavor, but it was behind a paintwall, admittedly. And it never took off to the size that Twitch and Blizzard wanted it to, and therefore it was abandoned. Unfortunately, I think there's still something there, right?
For sure.
There's still something about telling the story of the individual, then skilled storytellers are able to bring that together and tell the story in the aftermath. I think we probably won't ever reach the scale where it is feasible to have the co-streamer that only co-streams Lucios, right?
Sure.
That would have been cool if we had like 2 million concurrents at any given point. Then the guy with 20K can just sit on Funny Astro, just go like, oh, that dude just did something very good.
Yeah.
Right? That would have been great. It's not feasible at lower scales because there's the economics behind it don't make sense, right? Alternatively, allowing players to individually stream their matches, including comms, I think this fundamentally transforms the experience that this esport could have. Right?
Sure.
Maybe it needs to be broadcast much more like a battle royale because the experience overall is too confusing. It will probably be best for certain players as they develop their brands.
Yeah.
It will select for players that are both good and entertaining.
For sure.
It will also force strategies to become less about preparational play because you don't want to give anything away. But I think there is a lot of inherent qualities where even if you have 100% coverage, let's say you get every scrim block always broadcasted, you get every comms always broadcasted on the main broadcast and whatnot, other teams will still not be able to replicate that magic.
Yeah.
You just like the thing that you had learned and earned and the chemistry and how things work and the abilities that you have will not be able to be copied. And that it will fundamentally change how Overwatch is viewed and played and entertained, but it's worth trying. It's worth seeing, right? Where it could take it. Fundamentally, you need to rethink how broadcasting works. And I think there has been a trend towards a more flavorful type of shoutcasting in the first place as well, right? Maybe the large arena broadcast personalities are there for the grand finals. And I think for the great games, you probably still need those. But you also need sort of like, you know, the trash goblins that make the toilet bowls fun and have fun with those, right? And that's another challenge that needs to be figured out in order to see like how to really selectively find the people and find their culture and find the way they want to be talked to and entertained and the type of content that they want, right? I'm not saying like I have all the answers there. I'm saying that it's an interesting avenue, and then you let the multiple broadcaster, multiple tournament organizer algorithm figure out what works best. Just look at the numbers, not just the viewership, which is usually bad representation, but actually what lands in your pocket. What kind of money are you making, right? And find the sustainable systems there, right? Once again, I'm not saying like all those points are necessarily the ones that need to be changed, but those are the ones that need to be looked into and have, first and foremost, have an algorithm, have a type of competition between people, between companies, between broadcasters, open it up, let Overwatch tell us how it wants to be broadcast again, or wants to be enjoyed again, and then formalize around that.
Yeah, and hit that big reset button.
For sure.
You make it sound so simple, Yiska.
No, it's not. Like there's so many stakeholders in there. Like, what do you mean I can't keep my brand or whatever, right? Like,
for sure.
And I get it, right? But if this wants to have a chance in hell to stay a tier 2 esport, that's what it's got to be.
As always, Yiska, thanks for answering some questions and giving us some details on the Overwatch League or Overwatch Esports. And as always, let us know down in the comments what you want to see us discussing in future episodes. So thanks, Yiska. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.